there, this is Kimberly with the Block of the Month pattern for Lickety Stitch quilts. This month we are working on block number 4, Maggie's Wildflowers, and we are going to do a little bit different piecing again, like we've done before. So we'll get started. For fabrics A and B, we are going to do the same cutting instructions. So we're going to do the same thing for A and B, and we are going to cut those B squares that we originally cut at 2 7/8. We're going to cut them right down the middle once, just like the instructions say. Then we are going to do blocks, my glasses, C and E together and make flying goose units. And the same for fabrics F and I. We're going to make flying goose. We're going to keep using those no waste fast flying goose units. We have a little bit of waste because we do them a little bit bigger, so we can cut them down so they're waste less fast flying goose units. So for fabrics E and F, the main goose block, we are going to cut one square at 5 1/2 inches. And for C and I is your background color, we are going to cut 4 3 1/4 inch squares. And then color D, fabric D, these little cornerstones, we cut them just the same as in her instructions. So those are going to be 2 1/2 by 2 1/2. And then the last set of units we have are these half square triangles. And if you look at the pattern, if you're following her colorways or the light, medium, dark suggestions, G, there's 4 sets of 2 in each corner. And H, there's 4 total, so we can use our 4 at a time half square triangle blocks. So we are going to cut 2 G units at, what did I decide those were? 4 1/2 inches square, sorry. And 1 H unit at 4 1/2 inch square. And then we're going to cut 3 4 1/2 inch squares from the background fabric. I did send these to Karen in a PDF, so I'm hoping you got those ahead of class this week. And those are all laid out for you. We are going to put the block together tonight on video. My PSA this week, lesson hard learned from putting together the PDF example is, when you're subcutting units, make sure that the fabric that you just cut isn't under the fabric you're currently cutting, because it'll change your whole color scheme. And if you're like me and you didn't have enough to recut, so anyway, just be careful with those rotary cutters, folks. So I am going to pause and I'm going to cut my units, and we will come back and start assembling. Alrighty, so I have my fabric A, which is 3 3/8 by 3 3/8, and I'm going to have to line these triangles that we cut up out of fabric B with the middles. To make that just a little bit easier, I am going to fold my fabric A in half and press it, and then fold it in half and press it again. And that's going to give me the center lines for my fabric A. So when I go to sew these, I'm going to line my point along that center fold press line there, which is really hard to see with the pattern, but it's just going to line right up in the center, and I know it's on the center because it's on my fold. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew my 1/4 inch down the side. I'm going to do that all the way around, so I'm going to pause while I do that. Alright, so I have my square and a square sewn. I'm going to give that a light press. Fabric is my friend. I'm not being mean to it. Just giving it a little squeeze. And this is going to square up to 4 1/2 by 4 1/2. And your points should live right in the middle at 2 1/4. And you should protect your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So, and I must have really got lucky here, because that is right on the money there. And 4 1/2. I know I left the camera on so you can watch me square up. That's epically awesome of me. But the next step is right around the corner. So the next step that I'm going to do is my fast flying geese. So I'm going to start with my E and C fabrics. So I have my 5.5 inch E fabric, and my oh my goodness, folks, my 4 C fabrics that are 3¼ inches, and I need to mark these C fabrics down the middle. I could draw a line down the middle, or since my iron's right here, I could just give them a squish and get myself a center line. Ooh, I'm wearing my fabric. It's okay, orange is lovely. And once I get them all squished right down the middle, then I can line up. So I'm going to take my 5.5 inch square and 2 of my 3¼ inch squares, and I'm going to line them up right sides together right down the middle. So my corners all match. I just pin the one side just to kind of hold it where it's at. And then I take one more, right sides together. There's some overlap on here. That's okay, we want it. That's where our seam allowance comes from. And then I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to sew down the middle sew 1/4 inch from the middle on both sides. So I'll be right back for that. Oh, do you ever just have those days when your machine is obstinate and it is working everything against you? I'm having one of those weeks with this machine, but I love him, so we will be on good terms. So I've sewn 1/4 inch down both sides of the center. I'm just going to open that up by slicing right down the middle. And then I'm going to press this open. Giving it a little squeeze, not squishing it, not distorting it, just pressing that seam open. Little push, little press. Again, I keep having to tell myself, if I'm ironing things open hard enough that I can see my seams, I'm ironing too hard. I'm distorting my seam. So I've got them open. They look like little hearts. They're so cute. This is my favorite stage, but we're going to make that a goose. So out of the heart comes the goose. I don't know. That's not like an ancient proverb, but I guess it could be. So I'm going to take my 3rd square and lay it right down the middle, and it's going to hang off the end a little bit up at the top here. I'm going to pin that side to hold it on while I saw down the machine. I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. And I'm going to go back to the machine and I am going to sew down both sides of the center, 1/4 inch off the line. I will be right back. Okie dokie, we're all sewed down the middle, both sets. So we will just open that center line again and press open. And then we will trim our flying geese to 2.5 by 4.5. I went into pretty strong detail last month about trimming these flying geese. There's a PDF out there that you should have gotten emailed from the quilt shop. If you need help, just reach out and let me know, but I'm not going to take your time with that today, because I feel like we really did cover that fairly exhaustively, and my voice isn't that awesome that you want to hear me cover it again. So I'm going to press these open, trim them to 2.5 by 4.5, make sure I protect my 1/4 inch seam allowance off my point. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my, not this one, yes, this one. Goodness, I changed my color order, and so now I'm confused in my head. With my F and my I, my background fabric, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to make another set of flying geese, trim those to 2.5 by 4.5, and those will go together into our final project. I do have my D squares that I cut according to pattern instructions, but the last set of units we're going to make before we lay out and assemble is our half square triangles. So I have my 4.5-inch squares, 2 from my G fabric, 1 from my H fabric. I was feeling polka dotty today, so everything except the background has dots of some kind. Yeah, it works. And then I have 3 4.5-inch squares of my I fabric. These are real simple. We've done them before. To make these half square triangles, we take the background fabric and the color theme fabric, and we're going to put them right sides together. We're going to sew all the way around, and I'll come back for that. Okay, so I sewed around all 4 sides of all 3 of my half square, triangle, square, and squares. And so now I am going to cut them on the diagonal corner to corner. And I'm going to use my handy dandy rotating cutting mat because it's not glued to my tabletop, so it rotates. And I'm just going to cut right through the corners. And then we are going to open these up by pressing nicely. And I have been pressing toward the colors. You will notice when you look at the block diagram that there is nothing that like nests or has to line up exactly, so we're okay to do that. So I press towards these because they're darker than my background. Maybe your background is darker, you could press towards your background if you like. Just be consistent in whatever you're doing. And then these squares, these half square triangles, are going to square up to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And they're so cute. Half square triangles are cute. I wanted to show you before I forgot. Where did it go? There it is. So, what happens when they don't square up quite right? Or, like me, your cutter slips and you end up with not quite a straight line across. I mark it. I mark it with the dark pen where it's not going to line up. When I line this block up to sew it to the main unit, I want to know that this ducks down a little bit. So I don't want to line this corner up against my background fabric. I'm going to line this line up, and then it's going to go down a bit, and that's going to be okay. This is going to fall into my seam allowance. It's going to be fine. It's not that big of a deal. But every once in a while, something doesn't square up exactly the way we want it to, or we end up with a little oops, and there is a way to absorb that into the seam allowances. But if you make yourself a reminder that that's what happened there, it's a lot easier to do than remembering once your block is together and trying to figure out why it's 1/8 of an inch off right there. Although if you're like me, that 1/8 of an inch, you know, it's like unmatched Tupperware lids. It multiplies on its own when you're not looking. So now you're like over 1/4 of an inch off. And it's because I lined this up slanted, and then the next piece got lined up slanted, and it just compounds over and over again. So that's my handy dandy little note to myself on my block. Hey dummy, you screwed up. That's not going to line up. So I am going to open up my triangles, half square triangles. I'm going to square them to 2.5 inches, and then we are going to lay out our block to make sure that we are sewing it together correctly and put it together. Okay, so I have my block all laid out to make sure that it lays the way I want it to. And it does, and I'm happy with the colors, which is good because I was crossing my fingers there on a couple of them. But all in all, I'm pleased. So I'm going to start sewing together my units. I'm going to sew them together with my 2.5 inch squares in my corners as units. I'm going to sew my flying geese units into diagonals. And then if you look, that makes a great big 9 patch. I'm going to sew one row together, the middle row together, the other outside row together, and then put them together like that. Something to note when you're putting them together, is when you're doing your half square triangle units, it's easy to get them turned around. They all point the same way. They all point down, if you will, or towards the middle maybe, is the better orientation there. So you don't want to end up, if you're sewing colored pieces together or background pieces together, you're sewing pieces together wrong. It's background to color, solid to color. So there's that. I'm going to put these together in units and come back before I sew them in rows. Okay, so our sections are all sewn together. My corners are sewn together. My gooses are sewn, geese are sewn together into diamonds, and they're all going. I wanted to chat about pressing. When you press these units open, you are going to want to make sure that they nest. So for me, just because I liked it better, I pressed the goose units towards the outside, and that meant I pressed my half square units, my 4 2 squares, corner units towards the inside, and then my goose units towards the outside. There was one where when I was sewing my 4s together, I got a little overzealous and didn't watch my pressing, and so I just clipped that, opened the seam there, not open the seam, pressed the seam open there so it will lay flat when I sew it. There's no tragedies in quilting, I guess, unless this is like your full-time job and then you're going to be watching videos with me showing you how to do it. For me, it's fun. This is what I do for fun. So if it doesn't go according to plan, we adjust the plan and have fun. And it does look okay. It's not, tragic. Nobody's going to be prying your quilt open to look at the insides, what's it done. If they are, they have bigger issues than whether or not you pushed a seam the other way halfway through the seam to make it nest. If somebody is tearing your quilt open to look at the innards, you need to get them away from your quilts, quite frankly. Anyhow, so I'm just going to go ahead and sew these rows. That is the morality lesson today with Kimberly. Last person, to be preaching about morality, but quilts are serious business, man. So I'm going to sew my rows together. I'm going to make sure that I'm hitting my 1/4 inch marks when I'm sewing my geese to my middle units and also here. So again, for me, I will put a pin through my points just to have a better shot of matching. So far, I'm fairly happy with my points. I've got a little ones that are not quite exact, but again, I quilt for fun, not for my job. I decided I could live with that seam, and we moved on. But I will put a pin through these because there's obvious lineups there. And I'm going to sew my rows together, and then I'm going to sew my rows together. So I will come back, I'm going to pause, and we will share our finished blocks and chat through the end. Whoops. That